just a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. 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 Interesting.
These are the early banks in the county, and down here is the officers at the time they were
Right.
formed.
Right.
And
We're good. Okay, we're on. Hey, here we are. Hey, Lyndall Fraker again with Marshfield Old School Times. Thank you all for tuning in today. Big day here at our Marshfield Community Center campus. We have a lot going on. We have a kind of a spring festival here, introducing some of our new shops and boutiques that we have in the building. And we've had the Jets, the band, the high school band that started last year that been playing around the community, that our grandson Emmett is the drummer, of course. And they've been playing out front today, and a couple of food trucks and so forth. So it's been a fun day. And of course, this all kicks off the week of Cherry Blossom Festival, which will actually start tomorrow with the community-wide church service. And then each day has several events going on. Several will be going on here at the community center. As a matter of fact, they've got the gymnasium leased all week with events going on about every day. The vendor affairs, or I'm sorry, the autograph sessions are Friday and Saturday, and then on Thursday night is donkey basketball, which is a fundraiser for the Marshfield Community Band, which has recently got underway and started. They've been practicing here at the facility. And then I think Wednesday night is Rhonda Vincent, and then several other things going on around town, of course. And so be sure and try to catch some of the festival while you're, this week. I think we're going to have some nice weather. Today, I'm very, very pleased to have back a two-timer. We've had a couple of two-timers. Larry Rost. Larry, welcome back.
thank you.
You betcha. He talked to us back in the fall, came on and talked about land grants in Webster County, and very, very interesting topic. And then he's done a lot of research as well on the history of banking in Webster County and banking in general, I think. Larry, a former banker and educator, and just an interesting guy. And he's worked a lot with the Historical Society on researching various topics. So again, we're going to talk about that today, and I think we're going to get underway here pretty quick. So Larry, again, thank you for coming in, and I'm going to kind of just turn this thing over to you. But to start with, let's just kind of reintroduce yourself to people, those that might be watching that are new. Tell them a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Okay, well, I was raised here. There, it is a familiar name in the community. Rost is, and it's amazing how simple and easy it is to spell it. But whenever you leave this area, you have to identify exactly how it's spelled, because
No way.
you will get all kinds of possible variations. We graduated from high school here, I guess it was in 1962. Went to the University of Missouri, graduated from there. Was highly influenced during the high school years with Arlen Young and vocational agriculture, so I thought I'd just major in that. And wound up at West Plains, Missouri for about 6 years, teaching VOAG and the FFA advisor, and then went to Purdue University, the Boilermakers, who was not able to capture the Final Four this year. They in basketball, they were just one win away.
Yeah.
But did not want to raise a family in the environments of universities and colleges and what have you. So we moved back to Willow Springs, Missouri for another 4 years in ag. Then I moved over from education into the banking business. And I worked for a number of years, about 6 years or so, in a national bank in West Plains, Missouri. We left there and went to a national bank in Albion, Illinois. And they were in some pretty tough economic times there because they were drilling oil and the rest of it was ag production. It was corn and soybeans and crops, and people had overpaid some for land. And so it was really, really tough getting through that session. But I worked at a national bank there for about 20 years, and retired, moved back to here to Marshfield. Before I left, though, I ran a gal by the name of Greer, Katie, and caught her. And so,
Yeah, back in the
so
60s. Yeah.
yeah, so we've spent. I tell you, we're about to sit to the 60-year mark, and there's just nothing like having a partner in action that understands and stays with you and works.
That's
So
right.
we've been in every bank that I've worked at, and that's been three of them. They were national banks, and each one of them was located in courthouse, and where the central part of government in that county exists. And I think that's a pretty good recipe for success if you're in the action area.
Mhm.
So my interest in banks, and because the study of banks is a little bit like watching paint dry, that's about how exciting that it really is. But it is the history is and what they contribute. And the changes that have occurred have been colossal and continue to be colossal. But having worked in three national banks and three different communities, and all of those at the courthouse area of those counties, so you develop something. I had a question. I had a real question about the banks in Webster County because from the time that I was born, and there was one bank in the courthouse square, Webster County Bank, I believe it was then, and there might have been some other kind of satellite programs, but that was the one that I remember. But it was not a national bank; it was a state chartered bank. So I became interested in the history of. I had questions that I wanted to answer for myself, not necessarily for anybody else. Um, why did we need to have these banks? Why did the country need to have them? Why did Webster County need to have them? And then why did they organize the way that they did within the county? So you have to go back nearly to the Civil War. In Civil War, if those of you that have become students of history, you would find that the railroads had run to Rolla, Missouri, and that was the trailhead for we were the frontier. All of this area was frontier land, and you could ship supplies, et cetera, on the rail out to Rolla. And then you would have to wagon train it or whatever from there in. And one of the banks that I worked at down in West Plains, they had wagon trails up from there to Rolla to pick up supplies. It was about a 3-day trip to go from there to Rolla, pick up their supplies, and go back. But anyway, when the railroads began to be reestablished after the Civil War, if you do any work with the Civil War, you would find that the railroad tracks right on the other side of Rolla, from Rolla to St. Louis, was torn up many, many times by both sides. The Confederates would be in there and they'd tear it up and burn the bridges. Union would come back and build them all back, and then when it looked like they were going to get whipped, well, they would tear up the railroad tracks and burn the bridges. So everybody was busy doing that. After the war was over, And there had been a commission before the war that they wanted railroad tracks built from St. Louis, which was the major point across the Mississippi River, to southwestern Missouri. And the federal gave the state a lot of land, and that is an interesting thing in its own right as to how that worked. But they gave the land to Missouri. Missouri accepted the land, produced railroad bonds, and here comes the railroad then. Well, when it got into Webster County, this was beginning to work pretty good. The war was over. Confederate money wasn't any good. The Continental dollar was pretty highly variable. But you had tie buying stations. They needed to have ties. And that was harvesting those out of the Ozarks with the hard oak lumber, and a tremendous source of employment for people. And then they could deliver supplies as far as the railroad tracks ran. So you had those tie buying stations that became commerce areas. They would ship to those areas. The people would deliver the ties. Well, there was a demand for leather products. There were harnesses. There was all of the things in wagon making. And they had to have general mercantile. And then the next thing that occurred was mail delivery. You had post offices. Ordinarily in those commerce centers, you had a post office. You had the mercantile store, and then you would have the sugars and the coffee and livery stables and all of those kinds of things. But you were bartering for all of that. There wasn't anything to oil the transactions really, because you had to trade so many eggs for sugar, and then milk, and well, usually everybody had an old milk cow. But anyway, these became commerce centers, and then as the railroad expanded on through, then there would be another commerce center and a commerce center. Niagara, Missouri was a bustling community. Well, with that, of course, you have families that come in, you have churches to come in, you have, and sometimes some schools, some rudimentary education that would occur. And then at the next tie buying station, those same things would occur. So you had like Niagara, you had Marshfield, and you had Northview, and right on up the line. And so those commerce centers, they needed that. They needed to be able to make transactions with something that could be depended upon. You had a long history of the early forefathers. You had some of them that did not want anything centralized. You had others that wanted centralized. Money looked like it needed to be probably centralized and subject to things. Until that happened, you had mercantile people that produced money. Had no standing with the government. It was
just their own like gift certificate.
The strength. That's right.
Kind of like a gift certificate.
But that certificate didn't have the same value at the place where it originated as it did 20 miles on down the track.
Sure. Yeah.
So they needed some centralization on the value of currency, and then they needed to distribute currency. So the banks, the early banks that came into existence was national banks, chartered by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency or the Federal Reserve. You would get a group of citizens maybe that that had some financial resources that would gather together enough money that they could capitalize the formation of a bank. And they would apply for a charter to do business. Well, now there was a great deal of pride. There was all of those kinds of things with a national bank.
Question.
Yes.
So would the reason that you would go to a national charter or request a national charter, or the states didn't get involved yet, could that go all the way back to the Constitution, where the U.S. Constitution said that, basically the two things that the national government should do is the military and the currency,
Yeah.
because of the international trade, I
Yeah.
suppose. I'm assuming that would have been a factor in that.
Yeah, it was a carryover,
Mhm.
but you had a lot of different thought. Thomas Jefferson was so against money, so against currency, and he had to fight an awfully lot, but he lost, and they developed it anyway.
Yeah.
So you could apply for a charter
Mhm.
at a national bank. Now, how do you get money into circulation? Well, you've got to print something that is stable. And now you can't have all this other money out there. Even though some tried to mimic it quite a bit, that would be
Yeah.
that would be counterfeiting. But it was interesting how that worked. If you were a national bank, you could order from the Federal Reserve bills. You had to purchase U.S. Treasury notes first and offer those up as collateral to protect the bills, and then you could order them and get them sent to the bank. That's how it happened. They would order $1 bills, $5 bills, $20 bills, or whatever.
It'd have their name on it.
And they would have their name on it, and on the bill would be the charter number of the bank. It was number 6606 or whatever, and they would send those bills to the bank in sheets with a great big pair of scissors, and the local people would clip those out, and then two bank officials would have to sign the bills.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they had to,
Yeah.
and it was usually the president or the executive vice president and the cashier.
Mm-hmm.
Cashier was a highly recognized person in the banking structure. So they would sign them, and then they would place those in circulation. And when they had to have more, they would have to order more, scoot up their U.S. treasuries to protect it, order it, and then put those in circulation. Now the unpublished deal on that was within a community, within a county, maybe. First national.
Right. Right.
That was important.
That was important.
Yeah. If you couldn't be the first one, then you were going to be the second,
Yeah.
or some other name.
Sure. Sure.
So the First National Bank was everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And I was working for the bank in the West Plains, and I had a guy to move to the area. And he came in and he sat down and visited with me, and he said, I want to move all of my business to the bank. And he said, I've picked this bank because it's the First National Bank.
Yeah. Yeah.
Said, I figure all the First National banks are related. Well, they aren't.
Right.
But
So
they're related in that they have a charter.
Yeah, but that would be First National Bank of West Plains.
Could have
First
been,
National
yes.
Bank of Marshfield,
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there could be several in a state, but no affiliation.
Oh, right. They I worked in Fairfield, Illinois, and they had two national banks in town, one on one corner and one on the other. And I worked for not the first one, the second.
What was its name?
Fairfield National Bank, and the other one, the first one was First National.
First
Bank.
National Bank of
Mhm.
Fairfield.
Yeah.
So,
So, and we were on the same block in the city. Um, eventually, they figured out, and this is kind of a misconstructed thing. Um, there were a lot of banks that were closed in the 1930s,
yes.
but not all of those were broke. They the government had become a little overly sympathetic toward the doing the bank charters, and so they took some of them out of business, and the city that I worked in was one of them. With those two national banks, the bank examiners came to town in November of 1931. They called a meeting of both of the boards of directors of each of the banks. Had a meeting and they said, gentlemen and ladies, we're just going to have one bank here. And we're not going to tell you which one it's going to be. We're going to give you 3 weeks to decide which one it's going to be. And when we come back, there will be a merger and one survivor. It did happen that way. And I have read that document through completely from end to end. It was fascinating.
I bet it
in the 1930s. It was just absolutely fascinating. So that's how now the states wanted to have a little chunk of that. And so you could get state charters and or national charters. State chartered banks could not order any money from the Federal Reserve and put it in circulation. So there was a correspondent bank relationship that developed. State banks would correspond with a national bank.
Mm-hmm.
National bank would order all of the bills and what have you that they needed and then pass it on to them, and they would put it in circulation. So
would they use those as their depository bank too, necessarily, or not necessarily?
they would. There usually were stipulations that they would maintain so much deposit in the national bank, and those became lead bank. Eventually, they gravitated to the metropolitan areas where and the Federal Reserve banks were located. Missouri has 2 of them, I guess. We have one in Kansas City and one in St. Louis, but we're lucky in that we have 2 or 3 of them. So money in circulation. If you go back to it, now I'm going to plug the museum in Webster County.
Sure.
They have newspapers from the late 1890s up through current. And if you're in this area of the teens, 20s, whenever banks were required quarterly to publish statements of conditions in a newspaper of general circulation. So all of the banks in Webster County had to publish their statement of condition on a quarterly basis, and that was whether you were state chartered or federal chartered that you had to do that. So it's pretty easy to go back into all of the papers. Now they could have sometimes I couldn't find all of those, and that was probably because Seymour, Rogersville, and Fordland may have had newspapers of circulation, general circulation, that qualified for their, for their disclosure. But a lot of them were published, and I have put together over 100 years of deposits I had a reason for doing that.
Uh-huh.
But our people that begin to put banks together, I have those. I have them published, and you're looking at it
Right.
as to when they came on.
Yeah, let's
And,
talk about Webster County specifically
Yeah.
on that. This one page here is really interesting. All the banks are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 banks or so that were all chartered in Webster County
That's right.
over the past 100 and
Yeah. Since 1910, for sure.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got Citizens Bank of Marshfield, the oldest one, 1892.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to 1892, Webster County formed in 1855.
Right.
Most of the cities, the towns, would have all been somewhere just a few years after that 1855.
Right.
So where did people bank prior to that?
They probably didn't. It was still
just
a bartering.
bartered with their goods and
It was
wares.
pretty much a bartering,
and-
or you might have a
some
favorite
gold.
merchant, and you
You
might have gold and silver.
Gold and silver. So you had
enter
some,
into.
like you see in the westerns, they had gold
Mhm.
gold coins or something that were
Yeah.
would they have been issued by the National Federal Reserve? Or?
Well, the gold, of course, the 49ers.
Yeah.
That was 1849.
Right. Yeah.
So you had a lot of gold found out there.
So they just they weigh it out. Maybe they'd weigh it out. A little chip of gold, go into a merchant, swap it for some.
If he could accept it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a barrier to trade in that you did not have a fluid currency.
Right,
So
right.
the system, everybody needed the fluid
Mhm.
currency. Everybody needed the banks
Mhm.
so that you could put paper money into circulation and it be valuable and
Sure.
and certain.
Could there have been a bank, say regional bank, like say one in Springfield, that would have been chartered, earlier than 1892?
Yeah,
possibly?
could have been.
And people could have possibly used
Yeah.
them or had an account there or,
Yeah.
or borrowed money from them
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah,
It's possible.
that could be possible. Here in Webster County, I think the oldest one was Citizens Bank of Marshfield. And
Well, actually, Seymour I see here now is 1890, so it was 2 years older.
okay, the
Yeah,
Bank of Seymour.
Bank of Seymour. Yeah.
There's always been a spirit of cooperation, friendly and unfriendly. Seymour and Marshfield. Seymour wanted to be the county seat.
Right.
And that did not happen and should not, because Marshfield is much more centrally
Right.
located.
Mhm.
But there was a great deal of competition, and the National Bank at Seymour, the People's National Bank, was in 1911.
Mhm.
The first National Bank of Marshfield was 1911.
Mhm.
And the article that appears in the paper was let the citizens of Marshfield understand that Seymour was first.
Yeah.
They got a higher number on their whenever they got their OCC.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they got number such and such, and I can tell you what it is. It's on this first sheet here. The Bank of Seymour, let's see, up here at the top. No, those are FDIC numbers, I think, up there at the top. But the First National Bank of Marshfield was 10009, and let's see where the Bank of Seymour. Yeah, I didn't have it, so I don't know. But it was earlier than the one at Marshfield.
Yeah.
Because they got chartered up earlier.
Gotcha.
So
let me take another look at these. Let's just look at Marshfield to start with. So there was 4 banks. Citizens Bank of Marshfield, which is the current Metropolitan Bank, still going, 1892. You had the Bank of Marshfield in 1904, but it went out in 1933.
Right.
The Depression. The First National Bank of Marshfield, 1911, the only national bank.
Yeah.
Went out in 1923, which was, 10 years, 9 years before the Depression, or well, 6 years before the
Yeah.
Depression. And then the Farmers Exchange Bank, 1920, went out in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
So out of those four banks, they would have all been in operation, say, in 1922.
Yeah.
But only one then after 1933,
Mm-hmm.
until 1977 when the Webster County Bank was formed.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you and I remember that. And then it was sold to what is now Southern Missouri Bank, but
Right.
Southern Bank. But I think it's interesting that a town the size of Marshfield, as you mentioned earlier, had a desire to form four banks, and it seemed like it would have been like groups of people, like, well, maybe politics, whatever.
Yeah.
But this little group of people were friends, and they put together a bank because you got another group over here putting one together,
right.
and well, he didn't like him, or maybe you don't know, but just for whatever reason, and there was four of them, and then but then a lot of these banks in Webster County out of the 17 went out during the Depression.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, the dates are here.
Yes, and there was one of these banks has a really interesting history. If anybody wanted to study it, this was a regulator requirement. Any bank that accepted deposits of public money had to collateralize the public deposit. In other words, they had to put up collateral to protect the deposit. So school districts, road districts, municipalities, all of those things that had a source of money was taxpayer money, they had to protect that deposit.
Okay.
If they read the rules.
Yeah.
So those that did not read or honor the rules spent time in the federal courts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying prison.
Right.
But they spent time in the federal courts.
These banks, that if there were so many banks obviously formed in that period, say from 1900 to 1930, in that period, and they didn't follow the rules, were they more subject to possibly not making it during the Depression?
They probably weren't going to make it.
Yeah, that's what I would assume that. Yeah. And then the other thing that strikes me, well, okay, so what happened in our nation in that time period? The industrialization of America. We went from an agrarian society.
Mm-hmm.
If you look around the square, look at this building.
Yeah.
When was this building built? 1916, 1926, the East Wing. A lot of the buildings around the square were built the 1900s, the 1910s, the 1920s. The Methodist Church, the Christian Church, the First Baptist Church here were all built in those eras. So there was a lot going on.
Oh, it was.
I mean,
it was
money
ambitious.
was flowing, and it wasn't just farmers coming to town; it was industrialization. Yeah. So that could be one reason we saw more banks and more money.
Yeah, and by that time, the railroad had been completed, and the state highways were much improved.
They were getting the automobile.
So, transportation.
Automobile.
Yeah, it all helped. And now you had World War I.
Yeah.
And then you had the Roaring '20s. Then the country really hit the wall because of the Depression, and then we had some very bad years, and we also had some very bad years in the early '50s. It was tough, but and World War II, followed by the Korean War. All of those things siphoned money and or demanded more materials, and you was converting over. And we came from the horse to the doodle bug.
Yeah.
to the farm implements, that was in the 40s and 50s, whenever
Yeah.
a lot of that began to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And all of that, the industrial,
Mhm.
I mean, it all, and the change in farming and
Mhm.
what have you,
Mhm.
demanded a lot of use of money,
Yeah.
but it also increased the returns, and people had more money to work with. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're right, though. It would be a set of people over here that put together enough money to form a bank,
Yeah.
and then enough over here, and then one would steal the chief person from the other one. And,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
normal competition taking place.
And a lot of these directors, when you look at the directors of some of these banks, they were certainly prominent businessmen,
Oh,
people that
yes.
owned property. You know, I see names here in Marshfield, D.D. Hamilton. We all familiar with
Yeah,
who he was. Foster's, McMahon's. You've got the Brookses here,
right.
C.W. Brooks, Whitten Birchfield. Um, so you've got some prominent names there that Hosmer, Hames, old county names. Bridwell,
There's a Northview name mostly.
Northview.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
The bank that that is very interesting was Elkland.
Mm-hmm.
It was the outlier bank, I call it, kind of the outlier bank, because there was no railroad, there wasn't really a lot of there was no interstate traffic,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, but yet they needed that for Elkland.
Right.
And so they hung in there. They were.
J.E. Hosmer was the director. Mr. Hosmer
Yep.
had the big farm.
Yeah, and I think this E.M. Bailey, I think he was a doctor
Okay.
making house calls.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's what he
Okay,
was.
Wheeler. I'll tell you who that Wheeler is. That he was a Governor J. Nixon. His wife, George Ann, was a Wheeler.
Okay,
Her grandparents lived at Elkland.
really?
Yeah, I had a conversation with her one day when I was in the house.
Yeah.
She very nice lady, very nice conversation. She remembered going to her grandparents in the summers. This would have been in the 50s. Yeah, like late 50s, mid 50s. And but that would have been the Oakland Wheelers. So
Well, it's really interesting. And then there was one bank that was formed that you could almost you wondered it was here at Marshfield, all right, but it looked to me like there was a lot of Seymour people involved in it as shareholders,
oh yeah,
et cetera, et cetera. And there was a bank at Diggins for a little while.
I see that here.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Didn't stay too long. It was
About 10 years.
yeah, the branch banking hadn't come into the picture yet, and so branch banking was not legal at that particular point in time. But I think that's how Diggins worked. It was kind of a branch from Seymour people.
Right.
But those are. It really was interesting to go through and to pull that out. And I thought somebody might have some interest in it someday.
One more
Yeah.
observation. So, out of the 17 banks that we mentioned that have been chartered in Webster County, the original charter. No, we're not talking about U.S. Bank in
Yeah,
Marshfield or these
right.
that were chartered somewhere else. Out of the 17, the only ones that are left, Citizens Bank of Marshfield, which is Metropolitan,
Yeah,
the Seymour Bank, not the Bank of Seymour, but the Seymour Bank,
right.
which was chartered in 1939, which is certainly still around. The Citizens Bank of Rogersville, which still goes by that name. And
Is Fordland still going?
well, it says here they merged.
Okay.
So that is that the purple the People's Bank maybe or something.
Okay, I'm not sure now what
but,
it is,
but that's it. That's
yes,
all.
That's right.
The rest of these they're all gone.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
So and the majority of these did go out I won't read them all, but in the 30s, and here's one 1940.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the 20s and 30s. So it's just really interesting.
Right. And the thing had sifted out, like, yeah, as you're pointing out, it had kind of sifted out by the time I was born, 1945.
Yeah.
So when we came into town, there was only one bank.
Only one bank.
Yeah. And it ran that way until we got branch banking.
Right.
And then you would have an outside source that would come in and buy. Most of the outside sources were mostly interested in buying the lead bank in the county. So they would pay, and name changes then began to occur.
Right.
And today, I think you just said the residual bank, Seymour Bank, still has a business here, but they did not really start here.
No, they started Seymour.
So it has it has changed massively since we got into bank.
Yeah.
So
very interesting.
It is, and now there's. I will.
Share
we'll run out of time.
Oh, you're all right. Share what you got. Golly, it is. See, it's 12 minutes till. How's the time went?
I don't know.
Well, just
we have too much fun.
Keep talking, Larry. Talking.
Well, I wanted to, and there's not any way to show this to our audience out here, but there was after I got done with putting all of this data together, I looked at that stacked data on deposits, total deposits in Webster County, and I got the number for 1910, and then I got the number for 1920, and I got the number for 1930, on up.
Oh, right here,
yeah. And so I looked at that data. And I looked at it and I thought, anytime you have stacked data like that, surely there's a story there. So, I had a lot of 2 o'clock meetings back whenever I was in the bank. Committees of one. Yeah. Because nobody would fuss at me. I could decide
You always.
So I guess as I was looking at this data, I thought, I think there's stacked data there. Let me think about this for a while. We started out in 1910, down here somewhere, I think. Here was 1910, actually here. And then in 2010, this number right here. So if we had 453,000 in deposits here
1910
in 1910, and if we had $471 million of deposit in 2010,
100 years.
Yeah, 100 years. Well, let's just take the deposits and say that is a proxy for the wealth of the county. Just as good as sales tax, just as good as appraised values would be the money that's in the banks in the county. So how much growth did we get? Or what was the annualized growth? And there's the simplest little old mathematical formula that you can use to get that. So I just put in a substitute. I said, okay, I'll just go over here. I'll start at this number and I'll double it every 10 years. So if you look up through here, it doubles. These numbers are double every 10 years. If numbers double 10 years, your growth rate was 7.2%. Well, look here. at how similar these and how similar these are in
Mhm.
terms of total dollars.
Mm-hmm.
How those look alike. They're not all that far apart.
Mm-hmm.
So you can almost make the statement the wealth in the county grew 7.2% a year. Now,
Mhm.
that's not exactly true
No,
because
I
the
see what you're
numbers are
saying.
awful,
Yeah.
but that's a good approximate number.
Right.
Now, that means that Webster County, through World War One, through the Roaring Twenties, through the Depression, through the droughts, through World War II, Korean conflict, all the tornadoes and the floods that we had in between,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that stuff in 100 years
Mm-hmm.
grew at
Right.
7.2%.
That's the rule of 72.
It is.
Your money doubles in 8 years at 9%,
Yeah.
or in 9 years at 8%.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's
pretty
amazing.
that's pretty amazing. And you know what? That's not too far from the stock market.
It would rival a lot of things.
It might be just a hair under the stock market. I think the stock market last time I looked was over the last 100 years it was 10%, or right
Probably.
at 10, 9 or 10.
Probably.
But that's not far.
And those are the liquid deposits in
Yeah.
a bank. And I'll just tell you that it just blew my socks off.
Yeah.
I could not believe it.
That's a pretty
We're
good track
from the
record.
poor part of the country, you know. We're Ozarks hillbillies down here.
We are, but you know we're the fifth fastest growing county in Missouri, though.
Well, yeah.
And you may, that's pretty amazing.
You and everybody else need to be proud of that number.
Well,
and I am, because I looked at it and I thought, whew, I don't believe it.
right.
It doesn't lie. Data arrays do not lie. They just tell stories.
Yeah.
And that's the story right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you'd have to deduct out inflation because inflation is built into these numbers.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's 2%, which is the Federal Reserve goal, that's their target goal, is to hold inflation at 2%. But then if you went to another county and did the same thing, you'd have to hold out inflation too. So it's almost incidental to the data array. So I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it, but it's true. And now there's another interesting part to this, and I'm going to tell everybody, you can still these call reports and stuff, and these published reports that we used to have in the paper are not required anymore. But if you want to get the deposits of every bank in Webster County still today, you can get it.
Yeah.
And it will be, now it would not separate the Seymour Bank's deposits at Seymour away from Marshfield. They would be aggregated, but everything else is separated. Yeah. Of course, you have to fight your way through. You know, the government, they love the alphabet.
Oh, yeah.
So they have the FDIC. You can go to FDIC website. And you can go, finally, if you can find your way through, you can go to the summary of deposits, the SOD pages.
SOD.
The SOD, the summary of deposits. Annually, the FDIC publishes what the deposits are in every bank, in every county, in every state in the United States.
Really?
That's a lot of numbers.
Yes, it is.
But I can go there and I can get.
Yeah.
And I have.
I'm assuming that's where you got these, probably.
Yes, yes. And so, just for the fun of it, and I'm not advertising any one bank over the other, but I took all the and then I quit in 2014,
Mhm.
basically. Um, Here was the Seymour Bank.
Mhm.
Here was the Marshfield
Mhm.
Bank. Here was the Southern Missouri Bank.
Right.
Here was the
Citizens Bank of Rogersville.
Rogersville.
Right.
And then I just put the rest of them in here as next. So I
Right.
was going after the 800-pound gorilla in Webster County.
Mhm.
Who are the four
Well,
gorillas?
I'll read them. Seymour, Metropolitan, Southern Missouri, which is now Southern, and then Citizens Bank of Rogersville.
Yep.
Which Seymour leads the pack
Yep.
by a pretty good amount.
Pretty substantial.
Pretty substantial.
Yes, it is.
Seymour Bank. So there's more deposits in the Seymour Bank, Webster County only, Webster County deposits.
Yeah.
We're not talking about other branches like, Arvest or whatever, the Metropolitan. Seymour Bank definitely have more deposits in Webster County than any other bank.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And the growth rate has been really good.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah. It has.
Now, if I came on up to current, that would add some more years to it. But I found out who the four gorillas are
Absolutely.
in Webster County.
So, Mr. Penner, if you're watching, congratulations.
Yes.
You have you're the champion of deposits in your bank in Webster County, Missouri. But that's a great tool right there, great piece of paper.
And don't ever give it up.
That's right.
Don't ever give it up.
Well, and I think, I believe I'm right on this, unless somebody will correct me if I'm not, but the Seymour Bank and the Citizens Bank of Rogersville are the only two banks that are truly owned with a Webster County charter.
I think you're probably
I think that's right.
I don't know about really. Now I wanna. We've got to get out.
Yeah.
I want to make one more. Ad.
Yeah.
I want to make one more. Ad.
Yeah.
I want to point out to everybody that the best fact sheet that has ever been put together on Webster County is for sale in a booklet called Sesquicentennial. There was a group of people that got together in 2005, and I mean, you can see I've dog tagged that. If you want to know what an international pickup sold for at Vestal Equipment Company in 1956, it's in there because I found it.
My dad worked there, by the way. You probably didn't know that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. This is a great book, and this is a follow-up to the blue book that Floyd Waters George did in 1955 at the Centennial. Yeah. And that's another great early book. This one's more detailed because we have better documentation by the time this one was written in 05. But these are great tools. And then we also have here's the Floyd Waters book. Some of you have seen that. The 2-volume set that was done
and they're great
this year, and they're a little more pictorial, more family oriented than this one. This one's more probably history of the communities, businesses, so forth. This one's breaks down by families and so forth. But a lot of work done by these folks. A lot of work.
Fantastic.
And other than a director that I don't even know how much they're paid, probably not much. But other than that one staff person, it's all volunteer.
It is, and this one beats it all. I'm telling you, there's if you want to know who served, who was elected for state senator in 1934, you'll find it in there.
Yep.
Goes by the year.
We don't really, we take for granted. Yeah. We don't really appreciate all that's done when it comes to history and research, and the people that do that on a weekly basis, a daily basis, all volunteer, and we should appreciate them and show our appreciation more. And the Webster County Historical Society was actually originally formed, I think, because of the centennial in 1955, or a year or two ahead of that. And then it's been active ever since. So support them any way you can. Buy their books. I'm sure they would love to be the recipient of estate type donations, whatever. But it's I'm glad you mentioned it, Larry.
It's well, this is such a fact. I found out who the first superintendent of schools was just by opening the first few pages here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is a treasure.
Well, what you've done here with banking in Webster County is pretty remarkable as well, and I appreciate you coming on today and sharing it with us. It's very interesting to those of us that enjoy history. I have one more thing I want to show because it ties in with this, and I'm kind of proud of this. So I'm going to go over here off screen for just a minute and get it. I have a calendar that I bought an old house to restore several years back, and this calendar was in the attic, really bad shape. I mean, it was brittle, and so I took it to a place in Springfield. A lady helped me do it, and we had it framed, and they matted it with a special glue. But this is a Citizens Bank of Marshfield. Now, this is not Citizens State Bank, I don't think, Larry. Is there one there?
Yeah, there was another one. Yeah, the very early one.
I'm gonna look real quick.
Early one.
This was, yeah, Citizens Bank of Marshfield. Okay, that is the Citizens State Bank, though. Okay, I believe it is. Yes, it is. Citizens Bank of Marshfield. This is a calendar that was put out in 1918.
Okay.
Now their capital is not their deposits, right?
Right.
That's their
right.
Their capital would be what they actually owned in buildings and property and stuff like that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that number is $50,000. Their deposits in 1920 were $620,000.
Yeah.
So a little less than 10% of their value of their deposits. But as you can see, the board members, D.D. Hamilton, which he was there back in 1910 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Nelson, who was involved in the canning business, tomato canning business. Charles F. Ellis was the cashier.
Mm-hmm.
Then John Case, D.D. Hamilton, again a director. John H. Case, Roy Nelson, W.P. McKnight, B.F. Julian, who was the mayor of Marshfield in those days, and I believe was a brother-in-law to Nelson. I'm pretty sure that's right.
Be.
And then Charles F. Ellis again. So anyway, I just found that in that attic and kept it, preserved it, and I'm just kind of proud to have that.
You bet. That's great. That's a treasure.
Yeah. But with that, I think we're past our hour, which I'm okay with. As long as YouTube doesn't kick us off, why? It's 2:05. But Larry, thank you so much for coming. And
happy to do it. Glad to do it.
We'll ask you to come back again down the road and talk about something else. I'm sure we can find something to talk about. So.
Yeah, it's there's a ton of history.
There really is.
And family members. I mean, you know, there's so many. There's so many people today whose ancestors made this community.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah. And you're in my family, the Rost family. Jacob Frederick came around, what, the 1860 mark, somewhere in there?
Yeah, 1857 when he landed in the United States.
Yeah. And that's another show. We can do one on the history of the Rost. You've done quite a bit of research. Craig Rost has done quite a bit of research. And that would be a great show. So we'll do
Craig's
that
done a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, went back to Germany and did some research and what have you over there.
Yeah. So we can do that. All right. Well, that's it. We'll better sign off. Thank you all for watching today. We do plan to have another show next week on April the 27th. The Cherry Blossom Festival will be going on. The vendor show will be going on at that time here in this building. So we'll have a guest on and see you then. Thank you very much for joining us.